NOSTR is like a censorship-free social media protocol. Anyone can interact with that protocol. They can build apps. So if you like the user interface of one app versus another app, you can still interact with the protocol from any of these different platforms.
It actually bugs the crap out of me when someone's like, one Bitcoin transaction costs as much electricity as like it takes to run a house for 4 days or whatever it is, whatever the latest stat is.
I'll just dive into some of these questions here. So the first question is, if you were a robot, what would you be programmed to do?
I feel like you ever see the movie WALL-E?
Yeah, a while back. Yeah.
I happen to just love Pixar. I feel like I'd be a WALL-E kind of robot, and I'm cleaning up the environment or something like that. It's a post-apocalyptic scenario, and I'm just going around collecting things, being a bit of a hoarder. I don't know, man. That's such a funny question. Maybe I'm like building capacity as a robot. So I'm collecting materials and scraps to then go build something that helps me move towards a greater level of autonomy, because I am a robot after all, right? Maybe I have that kind of a brain that or CPU rather, that allows me or that drives me towards trying to replicate or reproduce myself in some capacity. Maybe what do you think of that?
That's a good answer. So just to give context, I was doing this other podcast the other day, and I had two guests on, and I asked, instead of asking that direct question, like, what would you be programmed to do? I asked what the other person thinks the other guest would be programmed to do. And they've been working together for a while. And one of them said that he thinks that the other guest would be programmed to ask or automatically detect if food has oils, like processed oils in it. Because every time that they go out to restaurants, the first question that he asks the waitress is always like, is there oil in this? And based on their response, he'll gauge and be like, okay, I guess I'm not ordering that.
That's funny.
Yeah. So you're the first person that's answered that about yourself.
On behalf of myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was the first question. The second question, this is a tough one, but if you were to have to add one feature to the iPhone, what would that feature be?
Maybe like a turn off feature, like an automatic, like you can't use your phone anymore feature, one that forces you. I know that there's apps for this, and like there's no way that Apple would ever put this in your phone, right? They want you on that thing as many hours per day as they can possibly suck out of you. But just the ability to like, hey, you've actually spent way too much time watching Reels on Facebook and Instagram, and you've earned yourself a penalty. We're going to turn your phone off for 2 hours, and I don't care if you're missing emails or, you can't make an emergency phone. Like you earned yourself that penalty, sir.
Yeah. Well, I kind of wish that was in my phone. It's so weird how addictive this technology is, because even though like you're cognizant of it, and it's been something that I've just consistently been in a battle with, because also when you're working, you're just always on your phone. But if you just click into that one app and you just watch one video, before you know it, like you just lost like 15, 30 minutes. And it's having a feature like that would be nice. I actually did download an app that was supposed to make it where it was limiting your screen time on certain apps. So it would just be like one layer of additional, like, hey, I want to open this. Like you have to click OK or ignore limit. But even still, it can be pretty tough.
Yeah, it really can. And since I just thought of another answer, and that would be to have like hardware wallet capabilities, like a dedicated chip or a dedicated piece of storage in my phone. I'm pretty sure Android came out with Samsung came out with a phone that was also a crypto wallet. But you know how like certain crypto wallets or Bitcoin wallets, they're like, yeah, we're air gapped, and it has a dedicated piece of hardware for doing wallet operations. Like that would be kind of cool if, because then it would, like, your phone would just be, instead of using just the same storage that other app on your phone is using, there's like a dedicated chip that does cryptography specific for wallet operations. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
I could see that as being a way to introduce wallets to everyone who has a phone, which at this point in time is what, like 4 or 5 billion people. Right, rather than like having to have people understand like how to download a wallet and how to get that started and how to remember 12 words. Maybe that would be a useful feature for accelerating the adoption.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, everyone's got a smartphone pretty much, so
That's right.
just leveraging that infrastructure. All
Yeah.
right, cool. So this is the final question. Then we'll dive into um, your background and then Bitcoin and everything else. So the last question is, who do you think changes their mind on Bitcoin adoption first, Peter Schiff or Warren Buffett?
Oh, Peter Schiff. Peter Schiff will just live longer. So I think Warren Buffett's at the point in time where he's like, well, I'm going to die soon anyway. This is morbid, but like there's no point in me changing my mind in the last 2 or 3 years of my life or whatever, however long he has left. Yeah, again, that was really morbid. I'm really sorry, Warren, if he's listening to this, but you know what I mean? Like he's just so passionate, or not passionate, but like invested in the status quo and the things that's worked for him. And he also has a pretty bad track record for predicting successful tech stocks, right? Like he's a low risk like infrastructure investor, is he not? That's kind of what he's known for. Like banks, railroads, factories. Like he invested in gold mines most recently in 2020. Remember that? Instead of like buying gold, he invested in gold mines instead.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that when I look at these guys who are just so anti-Bitcoin, it's almost like too much cognitive dissonance for them to change their mind because they put it out there so much. They fought for that position, and I mean, you mentioned it with someone like Buffett or Munger, for example. These are guys that they never made their living, made their money by being right about technology, and they've actually been notoriously incorrect about these things. Been very successful investors, but that's not their bread and butter. So I think it's kind of funny to just see how they're always weighing in. And I think that they've gotten to a point where they hate being asked about it. Because I think that, they're smart guys. At some point, they've got to realize that they're on the wrong side of this one and probably best to avoid it.
It's really weird to see them talk about it, actually, because they couldn't be further from the truth. Like, it would be one thing if they gave a nice nuanced perspective or opinion on the matter. They're like, well, I don't like Bitcoin because such and such a reason. But they're doing like ad hominem attacks on Bitcoin itself, right? They're just like, it's rat poison squared. It's like, well, that doesn't actually tell me anything about it, right? They're not actually giving it a valid critique to it. They're just attacking its surface, and people who trust them and their opinions will just take that and run with it, which is really unfortunate, right? Rather than them giving a good perspective on the matter. Like, I think that there are good, valid critiques against Bitcoin that would warrant a good debate or discussion at the dinner table, but those guys aren't giving it, right?
Yeah.
Which is really unfortunate. And then Peter Schiff, on the other hand, has that Twitter feud or discussion with his son. So his son's a Bitcoiner, right?
Yeah.
And like, I just love watching that. And I think behind the scenes, I think Peter Schiff might be a secret Bitcoiner.
Yeah, but like I have that like inclination to think so too. I've heard his son in like some Twitter spaces, and it just, I mean, Peter's been wrong about this for so long. At some point, I mean, you just got to think that at some point he's going to turn.
Well, his business is a gold business as well, right? Like, it's not exactly in his best interest to come out publicly that he owns Bitcoin and likes Bitcoin. Like, he makes money when he shills gold above Bitcoin, and then his son is over there. Like, I think that they're both gaining notoriety and popularity from being diametrically opposed in philosophy, right? What's Spencer Schiff? Like, he's gaining popularity as the Bitcoiner of the family, and his dad's gaining popularity as the gold bug, right? And they're both rising and they're both winning, and they're only winning because they have that feud. If they both came out and were like, yeah, we're both Bitcoiners now, then like, what would happen to Peter's gold business, right?
Yeah. Well, it's also been interesting just like paying attention and listening to Peter, because he's someone that I feel like has gotten so much right in his thesis, but it's just like, oh, he doesn't have the full story. Granted, maybe I'm wrong, but I guess I've got a tremendous amount of conviction on the other side,
right?
For many other reasons. Yeah. Well, so I want to learn more about your childhood, your upbringing, and what eventually brought you into Bitcoin and led to your views that you hold today. So the question here is, let's say that you and we hopped in a time machine and we're brought back in time, and we're in high school, and we're in the same high school, and we're friends. At that point in time, what are your interests? What do you like to do? Like, how do you view yourself at that point in time when you're in high school?
I was a bit of an entrepreneur, so it was illegal to sell gum in school, and so I started a little gum business, a little black market gum business, where I'd like go and buy a 12 pack of gum and sell them for a quarter each, right? So it was like maybe $1 a pack, and I'd make $2, so I'd sell the whole pack for $3, right? So I've always been entrepreneurial minded and interested in making money. But like little did I know, it was more about like what we decide to call money than making it. Like going out and getting money was my initial interest, and now it's more so like going out and helping people understand what money is, and like aiding in the transition, the psychological and philosophical transition, in helping people understand what money actually is. Because like I don't really even think like the US dollar or the Canadian dollar is money. So going back to high school, it was I was in high school in 2008. I think I was in grade 11. So that's when that happened, and I just remember not understanding it all. And then The Big Short came out in like 2011, 2012, and I watched that movie religiously like multiple times to get that all figured out and straight in my head. And I got turned on to Bitcoin in like 2011, but it was between 2 or 4 years before I actually owned any. Unfortunately.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the common story. It's like that, or, oh, I wish that I still knew my password or could
Right.
somehow access it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I was always interested in money. And I got into computers in high school as well. It was so I viewed Bitcoin in the early stages as the intersection between economics and computer science, or money and computer science, which happened to be my two greatest interests. So it was just natural for me to gravitate towards it and then start learning more about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of the people that I speak with who are very into Bitcoin now do have at least some of that inkling of entrepreneurship, as well as the inkling of just being drawn to technology. So it's interesting to hear that you have or had and have both of those.
Yeah. I mean, just imagine the invention of the internet, or the invention of any revolutionary item like the printing press. It happens to attract the entrepreneurial minded, because the innovation space, or the surface area on which you can innovate, is so large, right? It hasn't been touched, and we actually don't really even know the full scope of what can be built on this thing, which just like that it gives me hope as well. Because, well, what can be built on this? I mean, just that question inspires me to go out and find out, and continue looking into it.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the areas that I really want to dive into, because I know that you've been very not only active in the Bitcoin community, but even deeper, you understand the Lightning Network better than almost anyone that I know personally. So for everyone listening, could you give a just quick, simple background, like you're talking to, like a kid, to explain how the Lightning Network works and why it's important? And then later we can go into some of the interesting things that this could be used for.
I mean, at a very high level, the Lightning Network is the means through which Bitcoin becomes a medium of exchange. Like, I don't believe Bitcoin will be used in day-to-day transactions unless the Lightning Network becomes a success. So again, at a high level, the Lightning Network makes Bitcoin transactions next to free and instant. I mean, that's basically all the lay person needs to know about the Lightning Network. And then, that's what I'd tell a 6-year-old. What I'd tell like a 14-year-old or a 20-year-old is like, I would get them to imagine a bar, or a situation where you have a tab, right? So you walk into a bar and you open a tab, and it's much more efficient for you to open the tab at the beginning of the night and pay the tab at the end of the night. Instead of like you buy 10 or 12 drinks in the night and you pay every single time, that's 12 transactions. And that's inefficient for you. You want to go and spend time with your friends and hang out at the table, right? You don't want to have to go and pay after every drink or after every piece of food you ordered. So the Lightning Network is a multitude of tabs, essentially. And like, let's just take one tab as an example. I walk into the bar, I open the tab. I can actually pay the bartender as many times as I want, and the bartender can actually pay me as well. So money is free to slide from me to the bartender, and then back from the bartender to me, as long as like if I open the tab for $100, we can slide $50 to the bartender, $50 back to me. At the end of the night, I pay the tab, and that's essentially the base fundamentals of how the Lightning Network works. Just imagine many tabs forming a nice fabric of these channels. They're called channels. I think that there's something like 25,000 channels on the Lightning Network now. We're an exponential increase, and that's really exciting too, because with every channel, the whole thing gets stronger.
Yeah, well, this is one of the things that I think a lot of people who aren't within the Bitcoin ecosystem actually criticize Bitcoin for, because they say, oh, well, the transaction fees are high, or it's slow, or you're not going to ever use Bitcoin to pay for things or medium of exchange just because of these technical limitations. And what you just explained, which I'd actually never heard that example with like the bar tab. And I think that that's actually a great way to explain it, where you don't necessarily need every single transaction in the entire world in the future to be routed through the Bitcoin network.
Right.
Those can be done on a layer 2, like the Lightning Network.
And like, it's important to understand that, Will, if you and I have a channel, we're actually just keeping track of who owes who what, just between you and I. Like, we actually don't need to talk to the Bitcoin network and broadcast our transactions, every transaction on the base chain. A, because that would be expensive, and B, because it just bloats the chain with additional data that doesn't really make sense. Like, if you and I are in an entrepreneurial engagement with one another, and we actually are. I mean, like, I work for Sazmining, so like, let's just imagine that Sazmining is paying me on the Lightning Network, and okay, I get my salary. And then I might want to buy a rig on the Lightning Network. So I'd slide some of that salary back to you. We're still only talking about one transaction, one Bitcoin transaction on chain to open that channel for like 10,000 USD, right? Then I slide some back to you. Let's say I slide 8,000 USD back to you, USD worth of Bitcoin back to you to buy 4 rigs from you. And then another salary comes in, and then that Bitcoin comes back to me. We're still only talking about one Bitcoin transaction that was on chain, and that was to open the channel. And then, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, I move on to a different company to work for someone else. Great. Everything's all fine and dandy. And we close that channel. And then at that point in time, that kind of closes our entrepreneurial engagement with one another. And meanwhile, how many transactions took place within our channel? It could be dozens, it could be hundreds, it could be thousands of transactions that took place within our channel between us. It's like, that's ultra efficient actually at that point in time. So it actually bugs the crap out of me when someone's like, one Bitcoin transaction costs as much electricity as like it takes to run a house for 4 days, or whatever it is, whatever the latest stat is. It's like, well, actually, you're ignoring so much nuance here. It's impossible to measure how many transactions actually took place within one on-chain transaction now because of the existence of the Lightning Network. It's like we miss that detail sometimes.
Yeah. So when we're talking, and you mentioned it actually, so the growth of the Lightning Network, I think that this is something where I haven't been paying attention to it like in depth the way that you have. The updates that I've actually been getting in part are coming through your updates and the monthly updates now with the team calls. But in regards to how it's actually growing, how many more channels are being opened, do you have any stats that you can share with people who are listening to understand, okay, well, this all sounds good in theory, but what's actually happening on the Lightning Network?
Yeah, so I was off when I said 25,000 channels. I just brought up a website. It's called bitcoinvisuals.com/lightning. So there's 75,000 channels, not 25,000. Oh, wow. There's 17,000. That was kind of the number I was thinking of. 18,000 nodes on the Bitcoin network. There is 5,500 Bitcoin locked in the Lightning Network. So about $135 million worth of US dollars. There's those are some good base stats. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Quick, you mentioned, so 18,000 nodes and then 75,000 channels. Can you just real quickly define for everyone listening what a node is in simple terms, and then what a channel is in simple terms?
Yeah. So a node is it's a Bitcoin full node. So every node on the Lightning Network has a complete copy of the blockchain, and it is a nexus through which Bitcoin can flow. So a node opens channels. They can open as many channels as they like. And after those channels are open, Bitcoin can flow through those channels or flow through that node. So, I mean, what's the analogy here? It's kind of like an internet service provider or an internet router in like 1991 terms. Right? Like instead of like these internet service providers letting information flow through them, these Bitcoin node runners or Lightning node runners let value flow through them. And like the difference is that in 1991, how many internet service providers did we have? Like a couple dozen worldwide. I actually just don't know, but like it's not 17,000, right? So like the amazing thing about the Bitcoin revolution is like we all have the power to be a bank. Like that's amazing. We can increase the number of value nodes to some arbitrarily large number, and we can increase the number of nodes on the Lightning Network, value internet service providers, to some arbitrarily large number. And those are both really, really amazing things.
Yeah. And you're actually speaking from experience because you've been running a node for a couple of years now, right?
Yeah, about 2.5 years. Yeah.
And so what was that process like of actually setting up a node? Because I feel like it's something that's talked about a lot, but the people who talk about it aren't necessarily always like, they don't have that understanding that someone who's actually gone through like you and set up a node has gone through. So can you just like real quick talk about how you set up that node? Even if you want, you could talk about like what prompted you to set it up, and then how much value has actually gone through your node since you've opened it.
Yeah, I mean, I do a number of things with my life. And so I didn't set up a node until it became ultra convenient for me to do so, ultra convenient and simple, even though I have the technical expertise to start from scratch. I waited until, or I guess I was more so prompted to set one up after I learned about a Lightning / Bitcoin operating system called the Umbrel or Umbrel OS. And Umbrel is a turnkey solution for creating a Bitcoin full node that also can be a Lightning node. And you just simply buy a Raspberry Pi, which is like a tiny little microcomputer. There's like more computational power jam-packed into that thing than what we sent to the moon, though, that blows my mind. And that's now it's like crazy. Sitting there on my desk and it's running the Bitcoin Lightning Network, and it's a Bitcoin full node. I plugged it in, gave it power, plugged in a 1 terabyte solid state drive, downloaded the operating system, flashed it onto an SSD card, plugged that in, and then boom, it turns on. It starts synchronizing with the Bitcoin blockchain. It downloads the entire history since 2009 of the Bitcoin blockchain. It sits there on the solid state drive. Then once that's synchronized, you can start opening channels. And I started slow with that. And I recommend others who are new to Lightning also do the same thing, just to get the hang of like, what does it mean to open a channel? Once I open a channel, what does it mean to send a Lightning transaction or to receive a Lightning payment? There's a lot of details there that are quite technical, and even for me, like my weak points as a technical person are in security and in networking, and those happen to be two large components with respect to running the Lightning Network, running a node on the Lightning Network. But the Umbrel does automate and make some of those details rather simple to get through.
Got it. And yeah, and for the actual like moving on from the Lightning, because now there's this new technology and it's growing. You mentioned how much Bitcoin again is locked up across the Lightning Network?
5,500 Bitcoin, approximately. Okay. Yeah.
And I know you're really good at math. What is that equivalent in actual value today?
Well, I won't tell you the 1 second. That's 135 million US dollars approximately, and that's as of March 15th. So before the 15% rise that we saw today.
Okay, sounds good. So 135 mil, and then that is what you can leverage on the network. So across all the different, going through all the channels, that's how much is locked on that network. How's that number been increasing over time? I'm just trying to get like my head wrapped around how quickly this is growing and, where this might go from a value locked up in Lightning perspective.
Yeah, I mean, so the Lightning Network didn't exist really in 2017, 2018. I forget exactly when the first transaction took place, but we're on more or less an exponential increase. In 2020, January 2020, it was 856 Bitcoin, so about 1,000 Bitcoin, and it was like it stayed around there until mid 2021 or early 2021. And since 2021, we did a 5x into today, where we've got 5,500. So I'm not sure if that gives you like a loose overview of how quickly we're growing.
It's growing pretty fast.
Yeah, and like that's in part because of how simple these applications like Umbrel, and there's a handful of other turnkey solutions like Start9 Labs, which they've got this thing called an embassy node, and it's all part of this like personal computing or sovereign computing revolution, where like these like the Umbrel and then also the embassy, they don't just enable you to have value transfer or value locked up and self-custodied on your node. They also allow you to access a social media platform called, or protocol rather, called NOSTR. They also allow you to run your own Vault Warden, which is Bitwarden, which is a self-hosted password manager. They also allow you to do self-hosted file storage, and they allow you to VPN into there. So like when I was traveling in India, my Lightning node was hanging out in Nova Scotia, and I could access it remotely, and I could put files on there. I could access my passwords. I could do anything Bitcoin and Lightning related. I didn't need to be local. And I had my phone hooked up to it as well. So we went to El Salvador as well, and my phone was hooked up to my Lightning node in Nova Scotia, and I bought wine at a liquor store with a Lightning wallet or a Lightning wallet application, and it communicated with my node in Nova Scotia to pay this person in El Salvador. Like that sounds amazing, and I've required basically zero third parties to make that a success, right? That is what I would attribute that exponential increase to. People are just like, not every Bitcoiner has the technical expertise to go and build a Lightning node and run a Lightning node from scratch. But Umbrel and Embassy, they're lowering that barrier to entry as the user interfaces for managing these things gets better.
Yeah. Wow. That's really incredible. I didn't realize that the technology there, that you could actually set something up like that. And pretty much, yeah. I mean, at that point, are you relying on any third parties to make those transactions?
I don't think so. Not really. I mean, in practical terms, probably. Like we're still relying on the internet being available, right?
Yeah.
If you want to like get really nitty gritty, of course I'm relying on a third party. It's like everything relies on some third party.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Nostr. This is another area that I want to dive into with you. So to start, and for everyone listening, I'm also very, very new to Nostr, so I'm going to learn a lot in the next 5 minutes here. But first, could you start by talking about in simple terms, like what Nostr is, and then we can start just diving into it from there?
Yeah, so the best place to start with Nostr is just to simply expand that acronym. So NOSTR is an acronym. It stands for Notes and Other Things Transmitted by, Notes and Other Stuff Transmitted by Relays. And that doesn't exactly tell you what it is, so let's expand on that. Notes would be text, and other stuff could be as wide and as broad as the user wants it to be. So that could be videos, pictures, invoices, value, whatever. That's the other stuff, and they're transmitted by relays. All right, so let's take a quick step back and talk about relays for a second, and compare what Nostr is doing to what traditional social media platforms are doing. And let's approach this from the context of censorship, because this is the way that I like to view it, and it's a hot topic right now. It has been for the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
Like I'm of the belief that we need censorship of some sort. Meaning I don't want to go and like check out child porn. I don't want that to like be on my Twitter feed. I don't want that on my Facebook. I don't want that on my Nostr. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, they all say, we got this. We will handle the censorship for you. We'll decide what you see. And so essentially as an individual, I've outsourced the job of censorship to those companies. And what Nostr says is, okay, as a relay, I'm just going to forward all information. I'm going to be information agnostic, and I'm going to let all information flow through the platform or flow through my my information channel. But the customer or the individual, the end user, gets to decide what gets onto their feed. So the role of censorship or the job of censorship is not outsourced. It's actually placed in your hands. The responsibility falls on you. Like as a sovereign individual who decides what information they would like to consume, you get the ability and the autonomy to decide what gets onto your feed. I mean, that in a nutshell is kind of what NOSTR's doing, and then there's lots more. And like the pertinent example is that NOSTR uses similar or exact cryptography as Bitcoin, and so more or less by default, your NOSTR account is also a Bitcoin wallet, which is just wicked.
Yeah,
it means
crazy.
that it's interoperable with the Bitcoin network, and like since NOSTR came online and like really. They went from like something like 10,000 users to 500,000 users just in 2023 alone. Like wow. I on my Lightning node have seen like a massive increase, a 5 or 6 times increase in the number of payments that I've routed, which is like, okay, cool. People are actually using this platform to enable a value for value economy, and they're sharing Bitcoin all around simply because by default you can, more or less.
Yeah. So this is my understanding of it. So tell me if I'm saying anything incorrect, but
sure.
My understanding of it is that it's almost like NOSTR is like a censorship-free social media protocol. Anyone can interact with that protocol. They can build apps. So if you like the user interface of one app versus another app, you can still interact with the protocol from any of these different platforms, which is kind of crazy because if you think about it, if you're on social media today that's not done through a protocol like NOSTR, you're going to have to upload something separate to Twitter, that you're going to upload to Facebook, that you're going to upload to Instagram, versus with this protocol, what you said, notes and other stuff. You can just relay it or put it out through any platform, and then that's reflected on every other platform that's built around the NOSTR protocol. So not only is it censorship free, but it's also no matter what other platform comes out later that interacts with NOSTR, your posts are going to be saved across all the different platforms.
Yeah, and a couple of notes there. That's exactly correct, by the way.
Okay. And I'm glad because I haven't said that out loud ever until now, and I just wanted to make sure that like there wasn't like a hole in my thinking.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And like in practical terms, that means if I want to build a social media application using the NOSTR protocol, and there's 500,000 users on NOSTR or using NOSTR or who have a NOSTR account, I don't have to start my user count at 0. I get to inherit all of those NOSTR users, and by default, they can come to my platform. Like they don't need to sign up on my app. Right, my app is automatically has a user count of 500,000 people, or whatever the current user count of NOSTR is, that's amazing.
Yeah,
that would be like okay, if I share something on YouTube, share something from YouTube to Twitter, like that content still lives on YouTube, and then there's a link to it from Twitter, right? Whereas with NOSTR, like when I publish a piece of information, it goes to all platforms at once, or all applications at once. It would be as if Twitter was directly accessing the video rather than providing me a link to it. I know that's a nuance, but it's actually a meaningful nuance. And then what was the other thing that I was going to mention? Oh, yeah, you said it's censorship free, and like I don't necessarily like at the relay level, it is censorship free, but like relays also get the ability to decide what information flows through them. And then you as a user gets the ability to decide which relays you get information from, right? Mm-hmm. So you as a user have the ultimate autonomy to decide if you want to outsource censorship, then you might want to go and select a relay that you like and trust or agree with, or that you've paid based on some sort of arbitrary service requirements that they say they're going to give you, right? So it's not that it's free of censorship; it's that it's that you have the ability as the end user to decide who censors you, and you can also just leave that person or leave that relay if you don't like the information that they're censoring. You might go and pick a relay that doesn't censor at all
Yeah.
and has like a zero censorship policy.
So would the equivalent be like, let's say that you go onto Twitter today and you're interacting with the protocol through Twitter, not NOSTR, but just in this hypothetical, but then all of a sudden Twitter like shuts down your account. It's not like you're suddenly starting from square zero again. You could just go to a different relay. But in this case, the relays can't shut you down, really?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, relays don't have the ability to influence your account whatsoever.
So that actually, I was going to ask you like how the algorithm, like how what you get displayed is actually selected. So it sounds like whatever platform or relay that you decide to interact with Nostr with, what like the equivalent of Twitter. There's one that I think is called, was it Damus?
Yeah, and like you want to be thinking Nostradamus when you say Damus or Damus, like Nostradamus the prophet. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so if you go and use Damus, for example, that's going to help curate your, your feed, so to say, versus, you could go to some other relay, other platform and interact with Nostr that way.
Yeah, so Damus is the app, and then within Damus you can select any number of relays and those relays populate the app with information. And depending on which relays you connect to, you'll get a different feed. But like the job of the application is trying to like curate an experience or trying to give you like, because if you just said, if you just logged on or asked a relay to give me all information that's flowing through Nostr, like you would get, your application would get overloaded with information. So Damus tries to like make that a more discrete experience by giving you only the information that you care about. And so like, how's that determined? So as a user, you've got a public key and you follow other public keys. And so when you open up Damus, you're saying, hey, relays, this list of 10 public keys, like I'm on there, Sazmining's on there, Mrugakshi, my wife, is on there. Like maybe those are the 3 public keys that I really care about. So I ask those relays to give me any and all information that they've ever published. And that's kind of what shows up in my feed.
Very interesting. Yeah. So I'm really happy that we got on there as a company with Sazmining. I'm still clearly learning about it, but it is interesting. And I mean, just playing this out like into the future, who knows what is going to end up happening with a lot of these social media platforms. Like the censorship today is,
it's an issue.
It is like, if you get banned from all these platforms, I mean, you're almost, I don't even know the equivalent, but you're like kind of taken offline in a way.
Well, your livelihood could be threatened for one thing. Like that's a big issue for people, because then the content of their speech will be influenced based on whether or not they want to risk their livelihood. And I would like to live in a world where like people actually speak their mind as clearly and as unfiltered as possible. And like I'm of the opinion that I'm an adult and I can handle whatever you have to say. Therefore, like I like the platform that Nostr or the protocol that Nostr gives me, because they put censorship in my hands rather than like I think of Twitter and Facebook and the approach that they're taking is like the helicopter parent kind of approach. You know what I mean? Like we'll decide what is good and not good for you and what is truth and not truth. And you'll just have to trust us that we're doing a good job. And then like after they just so blatantly, betrayed our trust and are like censoring things or influencing information in ways that we don't agree with. It's like, Nostr is a natural response to what we all just went through in the last 4 or 5 years. It's like, it's actually not surprising that we got, in your words, a censorship-free platform. And then, obviously the nuance of there's nothing quite censorship-free. It's just who the censorship sits with.
Well, it's interesting too. And when you were talking about that just there, like it comes, not Nostr is almost like a natural reaction of everything that we've been witnessing around the world. It's funny because that's the same type of story that brought about Bitcoin, right? In the very early days of Bitcoin, it's like, okay, post great financial crisis, it's like censorship free, money. Now we're talking about, a type of social media that pretty much anyone can use. It doesn't care about your background, who you are, where you come from. It's like anyone can go and start posting on this, and it leverages the Lightning Network.
It does. Yeah. Which is the first time I zapped someone or got zapped, it was just mind blowing, actually. It might not seem that significant if you're not like also deep into the Bitcoin rabbit hole, but just the ability to have the Lightning Network seamlessly integrated with this social media platform, more or less by default, is a complete and utter game changer. I also run a content business, and I was speaking with some of our writers in Nigeria, and like getting Bitcoin / US dollars in and out of that country, or even transacted with inside the country, is a massive pain in the ass. But they're like, just think about NOSTR. It's like, hey, like, can someone send me some Bitcoin? Or like, I'm going to publish some content from Nigeria and you can instantly send me Bitcoin. Like it just creates, it totally destroys borders. These like arbitrary physical borders that we've put up, it just wrecks them, which is great. Let's do that.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, what was the experience of the people that you're working with in Nigeria in regards to Bitcoin? Like what's been the government approach and stance towards Bitcoin?
Yeah, so my context is like limited, but it's ongoing. I'm like, I talk to them every so often. We pay them in Bitcoin because it's easier. So that's one thing. And when they get Bitcoin, they could, I believe they can sell it at a premium for US dollars, because I don't think that they're allowed to use Bitcoin, or it's like not government endorsed or permitted necessarily. I know that they can't sign up on an exchange to buy Bitcoin, and they can't use US dollars or access US dollars. There is a black market for US dollars where I believe they're paying something like a 40% premium on US dollars. They were saying the other day that if they wanted to buy one US dollar, it's 750 Naira, but the official exchange rate is like 380 Naira or something like that. And that's crazy, because that means like, okay, if I want Bitcoin, I have to spend US dollars, but if I want US dollars, I have to take a 40% haircut on my Naira to get it, right? So like NOSTR, Lightning Network, Bitcoin in general, it just kind of shortcuts all that, and hopefully we'll see a significant parallel economy in either Bitcoin or US dollars. Hopefully just Bitcoin though, pop up in Nigeria. I know that they have one of the highest adoption rates out of any country in the world though for Bitcoin / cryptocurrency more generally.
Yeah. Well, so one of the areas that that I want to talk about in this conversation is also your approach to product development. And I just have to say from personal experience, having had the chance to witness you in action, it's pretty unbelievable how not only efficient you are, but how deep you're able to think, not just from a product perspective, but also from like an end customer perspective. And I think it's really rare to have just that whole blend of the product side, the business side, as well as just an understanding of everything we're talking about here with Bitcoin, Lightning, et cetera. So my first question would be actually pre-Sazmining, like how did you first hear about Sazmining? And then we can dive into your philosophy around how you build compelling products.
All right. Well, I think I stumbled across you folks on bitcoinerjobs.com. I believe that's where I applied through. I could be wrong on that, but that's the first place I heard of Sazmining. And then I've always have been wanting to have my own Bitcoin mining operation. And this is the closest I could get to having my very own. I mean, I did mine Ethereum in 2017. I built my own rigs. So I was coming to the job with a bit of experience there in mining more generally. And that, I think, prepared me well ideologically for how to build a customer-centric mining product. And then just like a couple notes on my immediate past, like in the last couple of years, we were running this content business during the bull market. And then it totally fell apart because like the bear market just decimated demand. Like you just basically look at the Google search trends, right? And during the spike, our business makes money. And then like when that spike falls off a cliff and no one's searching for cryptocurrency anymore, like these affiliate marketing companies and crypto content in general, it just doesn't make as much money. So I was like, okay, well, I really like programming, and that's what's been missing from my life since I've been running this content business. I need to get back into this somehow. So I applied and interviewed, and I was really impressed with the interview process at Szamosszegi, actually. There was like a personality test, an aptitude test, a programming test. Like it was rigorous, but it was all very reasonable. And I was happily selected as the guy that you guys wanted to hire.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if you're comfortable with me sharing. We can cut it out after, but your score on the aptitude test, I think, was perfect, right? You get a 30.
I have something, I think it was 29 out of 30 or something like that. I don't know.
So for the people listening, this is like a It scored out of 30, and it's one of those things where I think the average score is like 15 or a bit under 15. And as you go higher and higher, like to go from 15 to 16 is easier than going 16 to 17. And so once you go higher and higher and higher, it gets harder and harder to score a higher score. And, you know, we've got some very, very intelligent people at the company, people who have some good scores, but a 29 is just absolutely unheard of. So when I heard about your score, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that we have like a literal Albert Einstein on the team now. Like and then just little things too. Like the other day when I was on the call with Maruga, and then we're trying to like do this like math in our head that's like a couple of like going between a few different numbers, and you just spit it out from the other room like in no time. It's truly incredible. I don't know how your mind works. That was actually going to be one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, is like from a problem solving perspective, like how does I'm just curious. I don't want to like bias the answer, but how do you approach problem solving?
Collaboratively, and from an information gathering standpoint, collaboratively, information gathering and process. So I can't solve a problem where I don't have the information. I can't solve a problem where I don't understand the problem, right? I have to first gather the information sufficiently so that I understand it. And then I need to collaborate with the stakeholders of the problem. So in our case, that might be the customer, and it's also the executive team, and it's also the marketing department and the sales team, right? Like when you're building a product like the one that we've built at Sazmining, I think for the first couple months, I actually didn't write a line of code, which was like awkward because you guys gave me some pretty like hard deadlines. We are on some time constraints and on some resource constraints, as is natural with any startup. But I was like, no, guys, like I still need more information. Like I still need to go and like figure this out. And like, I'm not ready to write code yet. And our product manager, Kevin, he's like, so like, when are we gonna like see some progress here? And then once I got started, it was just like off to the races. And that's because like once you know what solution you're building, or once you know the solution to the problem, like that's 20% of the work or 10% of the work, right? 80% of the job or the work is like understanding the problem, gathering the information, and designing a solution. If you've designed the right solution for the problem, implementing that is 20% or 10% of the work.
Yeah. Well, this is one thing that, you know, I'm not as involved with that side of the business as, for example, someone like Ken. But I was like, it is truly incredible. Like as you're listening to this, like just to give you some insight as to like what it was like from my perspective. I'm not sure if I shared this in this much detail with you, Keegan, but from my perspective, it was crazy because every single time you hear about rolling out a product or just launching something new, especially with something as disruptive as what it is that we were aiming to build, I was just expecting like so many things to go wrong, like almost like that old saying, like everything that can go wrong will go wrong, especially in a product rollout. And the way that it just like the rollout went and just how few issues there were, I was just like in disbelief. And Ken was also saying, okay, I think that everyone on this team can agree that there's never been a product rollout like this smooth of anywhere in any organization, because it was just crazy how just nothing was breaking, like everything was working. And then when there was a problem, you would just solve it like right away, like just like that.
Well, yeah, you actually didn't see the things that broke or were breaking, or like the parts that may have been built with a little bit more duct tape, because like I did some programming tricks to do that. One of the things I did was called a feature flag. And a feature flag is just a true or false value that either hides or shows a particular feature. So like I wanted some protection from me for me, but also for the company and the product itself for its stability's sake. So when we were like rolling out new features, I'd have that behind a feature flag, right? And if there was any problems with it, I would just hide it again. So from the customer perspective, like we might have had to be like, actually, you know, this feature that we promised today, it'll be out tomorrow. When in reality, I did roll it out that day. I went and tested it, figured out that there was an issue with it, and then just hit it. And like it, from the user's perspective, that feature was never rolled out, so it looks seamless from their point of view. But in the behind the scenes, like I'm working 14-hour days to fix that thing to get it rolled out on the deadline. But yeah, like it was I was impressed actually with myself because this was, I mean, if you don't toot your own horn, maybe someone else. You've been very gracious with your feedback and
It's
praise as
honestly
well.
how I
Thank you,
feel.
Will.
I kid you not. I'm not. It might sound like I'm embellishing, but I seriously that was my view of my perspective. It was really incredible.
I have to give a lot of credit to the rest of the development team as well. Kevin designed a good product. And like when I joined the organization, he had done a lot of the upfront information gathering on what to build. And I'm most effective when working with a great designer. And Kevin's a great designer. So he designed an amazing product, which allowed me to just go build a great product. Like he uses Figma, put together a nice prototype, says, hey, look, this is what we want things to look like. And this is more or less how we want things to work. I handled a lot of the technical nitty gritties. And then me and another developer, Brendan, we did the work that needed to be done to get it over the finish line.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if we can do it here on this podcast, but it looks like I have screen share potential, but it would have been best if you could actually, do you have screen share potential on?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
You do? Do you think it would make sense to actually go through the product? Because one piece that, and just for my own curiosity as well, I would love to see how you look at the product, just like through a like developer's eyes. And then I also just want to ask random questions. Some of my questions might not make sense. They might be kind of embarrassing to ask, but I would still like to give it a shot.
Sure. Let me just log into my account that has a mining rig attached to it.
Yeah.
So that we're like, because actually, yeah, no, I won't say that out loud. But yes, let me just log into that.
And as you're pulling it up too, I can give some people who are listening a little bit of context as to, at least from my approach, of how this product came to be. So before we launched it, earlier on Sazmining, we were looking at the market and we said, look, well, when you look at the market today, it's very easy for you to go and buy Bitcoin. And I think both of us obviously agree. Everyone who's still watching up until this point probably agrees that Bitcoin has a lot of value. There are a lot of things that it can improve. But there's this, you saw this large contingent of people around the world that, yes, they like Bitcoin. Yes, they own Bitcoin, but they would also love the properties that mining can provide. For example, you own a hard asset, or you're consistently, it's almost like a dollar cost averaging into owning Bitcoin, but there's a lot of challenges. Mining's not for everyone because it takes a lot of time to run these things. It's very hard to build the relationships to get cheap hardware. And then the electricity costs, I don't know how much free time people have on their hands, but at least everyone that I know, it's not like you have time to go negotiate like cheap hydropower. And so as Bitcoiners, we said, okay, well, what happens in a world where Bitcoin mining is as easy as a Netflix subscription? So we basically went out to try and build a product that we ourselves wanted, and to service that large group of people that, like Bitcoin. They like not only the asset, but what Bitcoin stands for, and they would love the properties of mining. And so when I probably should have talked about this a little earlier before we dove into the product, but really when we're talking about building this product, we're talking about taking this vision, taking this idea of what we as Bitcoiners want to be able to start mining, to be able to start getting exposure to Bitcoin, and then put that and make it as easy as subscribing to Netflix. And so in going down that journey, we worked with it was actually before we had even gotten to connect Keegan, but we had worked with a world famous design firm called AJ and Smart. People from there have helped build products like parts of Twitter, Grammarly, Slack. And we came to them. They can only work on like 12 projects a year. We came to them and said, look, we've got this vision. We're only going to use renewable energy sources. We think that it's really important for this product to come to fruition in the world. And they're like, you know what? Great. We want to work with you guys. So they selected to work on this product with us, and they helped a lot from the design perspective initially. So we had a good baseline going in. And then when Kevin came on and started implementing and improving on the design, and then eventually Keegan, you came in, but it was this really interesting progression because we were doing like design sprints and trying to understand the customers and build the features that they wanted. But even from the output of that like world famous design agency, this product has continued to evolve and become more compelling over time. And it's just been really, really incredible to see. So with all that background, do you have like a screen share ready to go?
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
So let me bring that up. I'm going to share my entire screen, and then let me know if you can see the Sazmining dashboard.
Yep. Yeah, I can see it.
Awesome. Yeah, so we are actually in the process of redesigning this page. There's been a banter about whether or not we'll just actually make the landing page your mining dashboard. But arguably, this is the most interesting page that you'll see as a customer of Sazmining, because it shows your active rigs, how much Bitcoin you've received, your total pending balance. It just provides those numbers that you really like to see. Obviously, this is the big number that everyone wants to see go as high as possible as a customer of Sazmining.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things too that, as you know, the past couple of weeks, I've been trying to set up a lot of calls with customers, just get their take on it, see, okay, how's reality meeting expectations? What do you like? What can we improve? And the thing that just absolutely blew my mind was just the amount of time that people spend on the website, like on the dashboard. Like all these customers, I could see their eyes light up when they're talking about, they're like, hey, I just check this thing like 2 times a day, just like constantly seeing, because it feels pretty good to look at it and say, hey, I'm supporting the network, I'm generating Bitcoin. And, all those stats are here on this page that you're showing right now.
Yeah, and we do want to build this out a little bit more. I mean, the most recent component that we released is this return on investment component. So it tracks the total amount of money that I've spent, and then it tracks the amount of Bitcoin earnings I have in US dollars, and that tells me how much US dollars I'd have if I had sold the amount of Bitcoin that I've mined thus far. But just doing some quick math here, if I copy the total Bitcoin that I've received and multiply that by the current price of Bitcoin, that's it's $494, not 433, right? So it doesn't tell me how much I would have, what my return on investment is if I had hodled my Bitcoin. And so we want to evolve that kind of return on investment component to cater to those hodlers out there, because that's me. I haven't sold any of my recent payouts, right? I haven't sold anything. I'm going to keep this Bitcoin until, I'm just going to keep the Bitcoin. I'm never going to sell it.
Yeah. I love
that's
it.
The idea, right?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the other things too that I think people almost take for granted from who are super deep down the Bitcoin rabbit hole is, at the end of the day, when you're buying something like Bitcoin, especially if you don't have that long-term conviction of where it's going, a lot of people can get scared. They'll sell it out, but they could sell Bitcoin at a bad time because there's all these news cycles where the news gets really bad when the price is down because everyone's paying attention to the news. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to just go and sell all your Bitcoin when it's low and then buy Bitcoin when it's high. And so mining not only has this dollar cost averaging strategy to it because you're consistently earning Bitcoin, but it also just kind of takes out that psychological game that a lot of people fall prey to. At least I also know I have a lot of friends who they think I'm kind of crazy by how passionate I am about Bitcoin. And they're the ones that are out there selling when the price is all of a sudden, when it's dropped by 50%. It's okay, that is not when you want to start selling your Bitcoin. You want to hold it and just keep holding it. But that's
I think your friends are crazy for not being passionate about Bitcoin, quite frankly.
Yeah, well, I do too. The only difference is if I'm outnumbered, then I seem like the crazy one.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, so the rest of this page is, I want to note just this component down here, because I worked on this recently and hoping to give more of a notification system overhaul to the application that'll allow us to communicate more with our customer and say hey, your mining rig is currently offline for XYZ reason. Maybe you need to go take an action on your account. And so you might be able to see that here in this component. But also I had the privilege of assigning myself whichever miner I wanted when the shipment came in. And I gave myself the miner with the serial number ending in 1971 because there's some relevance there to Bitcoin in general. Will, can you enlighten us on what that relevance is?
Yeah, so I'm assuming that everyone watching this knows about the gold standard. Not every single person out there has been staying up to date with what's been going on since we went off the gold standard, but there's been a ridiculous amount of money printing. So I was looking at this stat the other day because of all these collapses with, all the turmoil happening with the banks, Silicon Valley Bank, Silvergate. And I didn't realize this, Keegan, but back, I was trying to figure out like the reserve percentage that these banks had or have today. And up until March of 2020, there was the requirement that banks needed 10% in reserves at any given time. They removed that in 2020 in March, and today the average is literally 0%. So in terms of like the amount of that they have on hand compared to everything that's owed out, they've got 0%. And so when you just think of,
they don't need to have any of it on hand.
You don't need any of it on hand. And when you just think about this is just absolute madness. And it's like people are looking at, and then all of a sudden, when you're trying to manage risk, you're looking at, okay, well, rates are at 0, and then all of a sudden it's at like 5%, and it's like an impossible like game, like Ponzi game being played at the grandest level in this huge experiment since going back to your initial point, like the 1971 when we went off the gold standard. Like this is just uncharted territory right now, and I mean now is almost like there's almost no better time to really be talking about this than right now, because we're living in complete uncertainty. And if you're out there, even if you're not like in one of these countries that's gone through hyperinflation, it's like, okay, well, it's very hard for someone in the Western world for you to relate to someone who might have been in Venezuela and just seen their entire generational wealth wiped out. And today you're starting to see a little bit, but at the end of the day, like double-digit inflation, that's bad. There are a lot of people going through a lot worse, but you're really starting to feel it. But at the end of the day, this doesn't end with just double-digit inflation. This ends with, I think, what you alluded to earlier, Keegan, where you said, look, I don't even look at a lot of these things as true money, because at the end of the day, you have these inherent issues. These aren't bugs. They're features within these currencies where eventually they're going to collapse. Every single currency that's ever been created, like there have been thousands of currencies. They all trend towards 0, towards the marginal cost of production. And we're living in an experiment right now. It doesn't feel like it, but we're living in an experiment. And I guess.
Yeah, so I had this thought. No, it's good. I had this thought in 2020, like on this note, and like I have a feeling that instead, like a lot of us are fighting over who has money, right? Like tax the rich, and like we see all these memes about targeting rich people or whatnot, and that's all about like who has the money. And I just have a feeling that instead of the economic battle, like the great economic battle of our time, of our generation, it's not going to be fought over who has the money. It's what we collectively decide to call money. Because what we collectively decide to call money is actually going to define who has it, right? If we decide that the US dollar is not money, then suddenly all the people that had the most US dollars don't have any money, or they have a lot less, right? And like it's kind of a roundabout way of getting to the conclusion, or of saying that simply by redefining it, we can change the structure of who has what wealth in the world. And that was a profound realization for me. Is like, oh, this is a psychological war as much as it's a economic war. You know what I mean?
100%. So I didn't know we would end up touching on this today, but I went down like a random rabbit hole. So when the other podcast canceled it and I had a little bit of extra time, and then you last minute stepped in, saved the day. It's like, oh, we'll record one. I was playing around with Chat GPT-4, the new AI.
Oh yeah.
And incredible. Maybe we'll dive down that rabbit hole at some point, but I'm talking about from the monetary perspective. I was just curious, right? I mean, I know these stats where I'll actually ask you, when I first heard this, it blew my mind. So a dollar today, the US dollar, how much purchasing power do you think it's lost since it started back in the early 1900s? Like $1 today versus what $1 bought back then. How much percent purchasing power do you think it's lost?
I mean, after today's and yesterday's money printing, I think it's got to be 98 or 99%, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's over 99%. And even if you just take the more conservative CPI metrics, then it's still about 97%. So
right, that's what I thought. Yeah,
it's completely. So you're correct. It's lost pretty much all of its purchasing power. And then I was looking at it, and I really like wanted to dive in. I'm like, okay, how much did a movie cost back in the early days? You know, like in the 1920s,
it was a nickel.
Yeah, so these things, it's just unbelievable. Like so the stat that that the chat engine gave me was like 15 cents, but like that is just ridiculous. Like if you see someone
Right.
at the store today paying with nickels for anything, you're just in disbelief if someone's holding up a line for something like that. But
Yeah.
back in those days, this was, you know, that the perception of money was just so different. You know, being a millionaire today is far different than it was like, you know,
It
50
just
years
doesn't
ago.
mean as much.
Yeah, it's
It's
almost
not that
nothing.
impressive anymore.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing too, is like when you think about it, do you think that the cost of movies has gone up or down over time? Like not only are things
Down.
so much, exactly, like things are so much more expensive today, but simultaneously it's so much easier to produce them. So that level of inflation is present despite all of this innovation that's taken place. So it is just truly unbelievable. It's like people look at the US dollar or any currency and they think it's reliable, but it's basically you're the frog in boiling water. You know, you're not realizing that your purchasing power is being completely eroded from something like inflation. And it becomes more obvious when you have the inflation that we have today, double digit inflation. But I mean, even if it's 2% a year, it's like that's pretty significant. You take 2% over 50 years and you've lost a tremendous amount of whatever it is that you held. So,
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, and that's what they target. That's what they say they want to have happen. Like, we
yeah.
want this to happen. And you're like, well, actually, I'm not okay with your best case scenario.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Let's get back to this demo, so we can
Oh, yeah.
yeah, get through this, and maybe there's a couple of follow-up items we want to touch on at the end. But so at the end of the day, like what we were going for this whole interface was simplicity, and by and large, I think that's what we hit. We wanted to start from a really solid foundation, and in the background and behind the scenes, what I'm working on right now is stabilization and in just improving operations and automations behind the scenes. And so like if you're not seeing much happen on the interface, it's not that I'm not working. It's it's that I'm improving how well the machine is oiled behind the scenes so that you get a good user experience. So yeah, that's the dashboard. We go to the earnings page. We got a little predictor that says, hey, like approximately how many days until your next payout. We can click through to go to see the transaction that actually took place for my payout, which is nice. And then the settings page gives me the ability to change all my information, view the particular orders that I have made, and download the invoice associated with it. Because I actually bought this miner with my company, Atlantic Blockchain. And they pay the power bill. I expense that to the company. The company gets the Bitcoin, and then I throw that Bitcoin into Lightning channels, and that's kind of what I'm doing with with the Bitcoin that I'm mining through Sazmining. Yeah. Any questions there, Will?
Well, one thing, it's not necessarily a question, but it's interesting to see how everyone's interacting with the product. I mean, one of the things, I think it was Brian DeMint, who's also a customer, who was mentioning, yeah, with the Bitcoin I'm mining, I'm going and I'm contributing back to, you know, like I think he's contributing some of that Bitcoin back to the promotion of things like the not only just tweets, but like growing his social media presence and things like that.
Yeah.
But it goes back to the core part of the process where once you have that Bitcoin, you own that Bitcoin, right? You can do whatever you want with it. You can decide to sell it. You could decide to hold it. You could decide to put it in a Lightning channel. You could decide to use it to tip people on, you know, a social media platform. It really is, at the end of the day, whatever you decide to do with that Bitcoin that you mine.
Yeah, which is great. Sazmining doesn't touch that Bitcoin that you mine either. It goes straight into your wallet.
Yeah.
Which is one of like the really compelling things I liked about building this product is the amount of touch points that we have with between the company and the customer is actually, it just feels just right. It feels like it's just enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's spoken from a guy who was able to pay for things in El Salvador through the Lightning
That's
network.
Right.
So that just shows like how amazing the process is, where we literally don't touch the Bitcoin. The Bitcoin's deposited directly into whatever wallet you link to the dashboard.
Yep. The next component is the hosting page. So if you're familiar with Sazmining and the product that we offer, you own the rig that's sitting on the shelf in Wisconsin, powered by hydroelectricity. and we get a power bill at the end of the month, and you have to help us pay it, essentially. For every rig that you own, it's $180 a month, or if you pay yearly, then it's 11 times 180, so you actually get a month for free. And this page simply tracks whether or not you're in good standing with us. Good standing means that you're all paid up, all your payments have been made. You pay for electricity in advance. So I've paid for March already on March 2nd. And I'm in good standing. And if I was in bad standing, then my rig may be temporarily disabled until you get back in good standing. But luckily, we have an amazing customer support person called Petar, and he's on top of talking to customers and making sure that if they're in bad standing, he reaches out to them, sets up a call, says, "Hey, like, what can I do? Do you need some help? Like, what's the context behind this? Like, look, this is how you can go and make a new payment to bring yourself back into good standing." So this is actually a really important page for the successful operation of you mining Bitcoin with us.
Yeah. Very, very important page. And I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to go through regarding this dashboard, but I think that after we finish running through this portal, it might just be useful to also do a quick demo of the homepage and just show people, if they want to get started, how they could go about doing that. Yeah,
right on. I mean, the last thing's the wallet, but other than that, that's just a simple wallet page. Do you mean just sazmining.com or?
Sazmining.com.
Sure. I mean, let's. I went to app.sazmining.com. So that's this page here. That's just our main website. We actually, at the time of reporting, we only have 50 spots remaining at the Wisconsin facility. So time's running out to get your rigs. But this page, I mean, Will, I think that you're actually probably better to give an overview of what's on here, because I actually don't build this page. Our marketing and product department does. I build app.sazmining.com. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where this page, we worked with some of those great product builders who the whole goal was making it very easy for you as someone who doesn't have the time or the expertise to really run a Bitcoin mining facility or run a couple Bitcoin miners, just be able to sign up, like subscribe to Netflix and actually own one and start generating Bitcoin, which Keegan, you just ran through here. So, this get started page, it's very easy. You can click get started, purchase rigs. But then for people who want to dive into a little bit more detail, if you scroll down, we show some of the different publications and places where we've been featured, as well as a profit calculator. And so this is not forward looking. It's based on historicals, and it just gives an estimation of, based on the historical data of the past 6 months, I believe, how would your rig have performed if you were going off that assumption of selling when you mine. And this is just to give a little bit of additional insight for people to see, okay, well, if I had a miner, what am I looking at? And if, let's say, one miner versus, let's say you click 7 miners, for example, it actually is dynamic and stays up to date. And this is all tied to actual data from the past 6 months. So this is something that we thought was really interesting, that we just wanted to give a little bit more insight, and we wanted to make it easy for you to start mining. So do you want to just click on the get started so people could see how that looks?
Yeah, so if you arrive here on the purchase page and you don't have an account, you'll be prompted with a registration form. And you just simply need to fill out that information and then, verify your email. But the purchase flow is roughly as follows. You're on this page, you decide how many rigs you want to buy. You say, yep, I understand. We do have a number of people that reserved a rig. And if you've reserved a rig, then you get a credit off of the total that is required, and that'll automatically be applied to your account as long as you use the same email that you use to reserve the rig. So if we proceed to the rig purchase, then we give you a couple of methods in which to pay us. One of which is Bitcoin/USDC, but right now I don't think we're actually taking USDC because of the DPEG and the risk associated with that.
Turmoil.
Yeah, it's real and it's impactful. But I actually won't click through to the other pages simply because it's really not necessary. But the short and skinny of it is that we accept wire transfer, bank transfer, or Bitcoin and USDC. And my wife and I have bought 2 rigs so far. The first time we bought rigs, we bought it with Bitcoin. The second time we bought it with USDC. And those payment options were preferred for us because we're not in America, so we couldn't buy through ACH, and wire transfers are extremely painful in Canada, and so we didn't want to do that either. We are true Bitcoiners, and so we tried to use the most simple and frictionless payment method that was provided to us.
Yeah, if there was any other reason to want to get out of fiat land, it just shows how difficult. I mean, dealing with banks is just such a pain. Oh my gosh. And that's coming from someone who lives in the US where, banks are much better than in other countries. At least we can get a bank account. There are a lot of people in other countries who it's like they don't even have that option.
And a bank run is just their Tuesday. That's just a typical Tuesday for them.
Yeah. No, I think it's really interesting to just see. I'm curious to see how all this plays out, because I think it's one of the first times where in the US you're really having a lot of the realities that other people around the world have had to face coming to the US. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing this uptick in Bitcoin, where it's just a lot of people are wondering, what can you trust? And at the end of the day, if you're going to hold your value in something, you need not only yourself to trust it, but you need other people to be able to trust in that network too. I mean, I think that we're both of the belief that Bitcoin is going to do a lot of big things, not only over the coming year or two, but I mean, just in the long run, as more and more currencies fail, more and more people's eyes are going to be open, and more people are going to try and protect that value by holding something like Bitcoin.
Periods like this always make me nervous, because I could see the entire dam just breaking right now because of how fragile the system feels. And then okay, we're going to print $300 billion and inject that into these banks that are insolvent currently. And then I want people to be intolerant to that thing. Do you know what I mean? But I just have a feeling that they're not. They're going to be like, yay, they saved us again. and then we'll get another 2 or 3 year cycle of a massive bull run, just bigger than any other bull run we've ever seen before. And then boom, we'll bust the whole thing open again. And in 2026, we'll have to have a bigger bailout than we had in 2023. I want us to have more intolerance is essentially what I'm saying.
Yeah. So here's another crazy fact to me. I didn't know this before I started just going down the random questioning with the AI. But in the Treaty of Versailles, this was the treaty that happened after World War I. Germany had to. The big part that I'm going to talk about here is the reparations. At that time, it was before the Rhine. What is it? What was that currency called? The Rhine mark, I believe, is what the.
Well, there was the Weimar Republic, and I forget which one, but it was a mark. I forget. So there was a term before it, but
so it was the golden mark, and it was backed by gold. And I Googled what is the total value of all the marks, the gold marks that are backed by gold in existence of that time. So it was the value of the total circulating supply of the currency. The total value was $6 billion of the entire market cap of all the gold-backed marks. What do you think were the terms of the reparation from the Treaty of Versailles? So, and I'll give you a hint. So over the next 30 years, guess how much Germany was going to have to pay back in reparations, primarily to France, and I forget the other country, but guess how much?
United States, right? And Great Britain.
Yeah. What do you think that the total reparations were that were being put on them?
I almost feel like I'm being tricked. Is it a number greater than $6 billion worth of gold?
The number, I was astounded by the amount that they were going to have to pay in reparations.
Is it $2 trillion?
No, so it was I think it was 120 billion. I actually think I have it up here. 120 billion.
So that's a 60x, right?
Yes, of the total,
or 20x.
Yeah, 20x of the total circulating supply of the entire currency at the time. So how the heck are you going to pay that back? It literally just doesn't compute. Obviously you can't do that. And so then I was digging into it more. And so then there were all these different currencies that happened. So there was from 1918, they eventually went from that to the paper mark or something like that. I gotta find out where I had all this stuff.
That was one of the first fiat experiments that we ran in a relatively short period of time, right?
Well, it was just crazy because you had you just didn't have any way out of the situation without having to print money. So they basically went through multiple different currencies. I got to pull it up or I'm just going to butcher the name, but it was basically they went from the golden mark to this currency that started with a P. and then they went to like the Rhine something, and then they went to like two other currencies because they had to print it away, and they basically printed it away between one of the currencies at a trillion to one conversion rate. So it's basically like like paying off the entire national debt with like under $1, just because you're creating a new currency. But I mean, it sounds crazy, but this is something that's happened to pretty much every currency. Like all currencies eventually are going to be printed into oblivion. And if people don't trust it, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just either a number on a screen or a piece of paper.
Yeah, and so like the result of that is pretty clear to me. It's astonishing how much resistance that I face when speaking with no coiners. Excuse the derogatory term for someone who doesn't own any coin, but yeah, like how like no, but this and like no, but that, and I'm just trying to convince them that we've got two exponential functions at play here. Bitcoin's going to exponentially decrease its inflation rate and have a completely static supply. And then the US dollar, which is more or less the reserve currency of the world, and all other currencies for that matter, are going to exponentially increase their supply, which will exponentially decrease their value. It's like, well, how do you think those curves reflect or stand up against one another? Like you've got one thing that exponentially increases in price and one thing that exponentially decreases in price. Why are you arguing that the thing's going to be around for a while? Like I don't, there's a very big logical incoherence there for me.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. And that was the other thing too that I was looking up. I just pulled it up here. So I hope I didn't embarrass myself too much, but here are the time periods. During 1918 to 1923, they had the paper mark. I hope I'm saying that right. PAPIER mark. I'm just going to call it paper mark.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Following that, from 23 to 24, they had the Retten mark. And so the paper mark was used during the Weimar Republic's early years and during the hyperinflation crisis. Then from 1923 to 1924, they had the Retten mark, and this was currency introduced to stabilize the hyperinflation crisis. And then from 24 to 48, they had the Reichsmark, which was the official currency of Germany during the Weimar Republic and the Nazi era until World War II, before it was replaced by the Dutch mark in 1948. I mean,
Gotcha.
This is something that was like Germany was, you know, they were a very, very strong country prior to World War I. I think that up until that time, one of the things that helped stabilize them was that they did have more of like hard money at that time. Like it was backed by something, unlike today where the currency is backed by full faith and trust in the US government.
I mean, Germany's still the economic powerhouse in Europe right now, right? Are they not the largest? Don't they have the largest GDP of any European nation?
I'm actually not sure. That sounds right. I'm just not sure off the top of my head.
I think it goes something like Germany, then France, then Spain, but I could be wrong. Italy might be intermingled there. But like at the like how it kind of works out right now is like your GDP is like floating against everyone else's, right? And like that kind of determines the strength of your economy, especially like Europe's complicated, right? Because they've all decided to adopt the euro, and that's controlled by the European Central Bank, and it gets real messy. But I think that we'll actually take a note from that period of time that you just described for us, Will, with respect to switching from one currency to another. I mean, that's really the only way out of this, I think. Like A, hyperinflation, but B, like, hey, we're going to have this stopover event where like one day your dollars are not going to be worth anything, and we're going to suddenly just go use the new CBDC that the Federal Reserve decided that everyone's going to use, or the World Bank is, right? Yeah. Like that's the only way forward, is to like have a significant cutoff period and transition period where we all move to a different currency. And that at that point in time, people are going to have to ask themselves, like, what do I want my money to be? Do I want it to be Bitcoin, or do I want it to be this wacky thing that the Federal Reserve is going to give me and force me to use and pay taxes in? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm going to give two interesting thought experiments here. But real quick, I also did just look up, and you were correct. Germany has the biggest GDP out of those European countries, 4.2 trillion. The UK is 2.8 trillion. France is 2.7 trillion. Italy's 2.1, and then Russia's 1.7 trillion. So
interesting.
You were correct. But the thought experiment here is, imagine if you're put back in time, like with the benefit of hindsight right now, we look at what happened following World War I, following the Treaty of Versailles, and then ultimately the hyperinflation of the Weimar Republic, and then World War II. Imagine if following World War I, you had the option to put in and save your value in a decentralized currency like Bitcoin. Like if you injected Bitcoin into the equation at that point in time, what do you think would have happened to the price of Bitcoin? I don't know. I'm not saying that I'm not like leading an answer here, but I'm just genuinely curious, like what your take would be, Keegan. Like, what do you think might have happened if Bitcoin was around at that point in time? And I guess it's difficult because it's a different time period, you know. The technology.
I do have an answer for you, though.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
I think it depends on how long Bitcoin's been around, because I mean, the time period does matter a little bit because it's a digital technology, and therefore people with less digital literacy are less likely or equipped to adopt it, right? Like you don't need any digital literacy to adopt gold as your standard currency or your standard money, your standard unit of account. But like, I think I don't even think like if we gave the choice to 8 billion people today to switch over to Bitcoin or just the next thing that the central bank decides is money, like I think that less than 25% of the entire world population would choose Bitcoin. Like probably less than 20%. Like we could still go lower. And it's just because we haven't achieved critical mass with respect to trust. Even though Bitcoin's a trustless system, you still need to like, I'm a programmer. Do you trust me when I say that the total supply of 21 million Bitcoin won't change? Do you know what I mean? There's still it's still a trust relationship between those who can read the code and those who cannot. And I just depending on how long Bitcoin had been around in that 1923 period, I think that would be the determining factor in how many people would actually voluntarily choose it, right? I think they need to understand it, which just goes to like strengthen my my hypothesis or my thesis that like Bitcoin is it's a generational change sort of thing, and that's a painful realization that I came to. It's like, no, I actually want us to adopt Bitcoin now. Let's all switch over now. Let's all of us do it. It's like, no, this is going to be a really slow thing. It's going to be a gradually then suddenly thing. I'm going to wake up and it's going to be the year 2058, and there's going to be 80% of the people using Bitcoin now. But it's not going to happen a moment before then, I don't think.
Yeah. So as I was researching this, one of the other questions that came to mind was, okay, well, whenever there's chaos, there's always room for opportunity, right? And so the question was, okay, well, whenever we think about the Weimar Republic or this time period, we always think about just devastation, destitution, difficulties with the population. And so I actually started researching, okay, well, were there people that were able to capitalize on the situation? And when I asked that question, it was with the thought of today, let's say that we live in a hyperinflationary world, or you're living under a hyperinflationary currency. I do believe that there's huge opportunity today with something like Bitcoin. If you're able to get out of the weak currency or borrow a weak currency that, you know, goes down in value, your debt's going to be less, and put that into something very strong, you can make a lot of money. And so I was wondering, okay, well, back in this time during the Weimar Republic, who were the people that succeeded in that time? And it's kind of funny because the people that did very well, they fell into a couple of different categories, but what were people that were able to get between the different currencies and capitalize on the collapsing currency and the strong currency, or had hard assets, or were able to borrow in the weak currency and get into hard assets. And these were not available to everyone back then. Versus today, it's a lot easier I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easier today for your average citizen to go and be able to access a currency and buy hard assets or desirable, strong assets like Bitcoin or like real estate or things like that. But in the time, it was just interesting to see that, you know, despite all the chaos, there's always the opportunity for people who were able to understand what was going on and maximize their skills. One of the other things I saw were that people who did have skills, they were still able to find creative ways to do well. Like, for example, I read about like some creative entrepreneurs that, you know, in that time period, they took advantage of the hyperinflation by just creating new products or specialized goods and like printing services like around the hyperinflation themed posters and propaganda, just random things like this, where at the end of the day, there's always going to be the people who can look at a tough situation and you look at it and you're like, okay, I'm going to make lemons out of lemonade. But if you're not taking that mindset, you're not making lemons out of lemonade, then it's going to be tough. I mean, I'm just looking at what's going on today, just thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen to the everyday person out there, or the person who's not paying attention or listening to podcasts and staying up to date with everything going on.
I'm not so worried about me from like a financial standpoint. I'm worried about me from a security standpoint, because I'm worried that not enough people are prepared. And then the position that they'll be in, so economic destitute, famine, like what kind of actions are they then presented with to save themselves? And am I going to be collateral damage for other people's lack of preparedness? That's kind of a self-centered attitude or self-centered perspective on it. But like, that is, my worry is not whether or not I'll be wealthy in the future. It's like me having a non-zero amount of Bitcoin in my mind secures me against that outcome. My thought is like, well, this doesn't work unless everyone is more or less prepared.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
100%, yeah.
It doesn't matter if you stockpile food in a famine, because like, don't tell anyone if you're stockpiling food in a famine, because they're going to come to your house and you're going to have no food very, very quick. You know what I mean? Like, that's more so what I'm worried about. And that's why I love podcasts as well, because this is the ability, we have the ability to distribute financial literacy and digital literacy at a rate that has hitherto been unforeseen on the world, which is incredible. I just can't believe that we have this technology at our fingertips.
Yeah. Well, if you talk to someone from, going back to the early days of the dollar, like let's say 100 years ago, and you were telling them about how the world looks today, like they would literally look at you like you're an absolute crazy person. Like it would probably be like, talking to an old person about Bitcoin in like 2011, right? It's just like absolute craziness, because it's just a complete paradigm shift. I mean, how do I want to say this? Like, if you look at the early days of, for example, the printing press, this was an unbelievably revolutionary piece of technology, because it made it very easy for you to maintain and transport information across space and time. Like now you could have books and you could have messages that spread very, very quickly. And there's a big argument to be made that the printing press is a big reason for how religion
separation of church
and state, and how like that. Yeah, exactly. So taking that a step further, and then you look at something like the internet. I mean, this is like another step change in terms of being able to move information across the world, communicate messages. I mean, even what we're doing here, right? You're in Canada, I'm in the US, we're having this conversation. You're going to have a bunch of people that are able to tune in and listen to this conversation in some other part of the world, who can pause it, go back, go forward, do whatever. I mean, it's literally like you're creating duplicates of yourself across space and time, and that allows you to get a lot of information out very quickly and easily. And now you're looking at something like Bitcoin, and this is just like how information being able to be moved more efficiently changed and was the separation of church and state. Now, I mean, I would guess that you're in a similar boat as me in believing that Bitcoin is ultimately going to lead to a paradigm shift of the separation of money and state. And this is something that we haven't seen in the world, where you could have a separation of money and state, just like before the separation of church and state. That was a very foreign concept. But just taking all the variables in, looking at how the world is today and where things are going, I don't think it's far-fetched to say that Bitcoin is the beginning of that splintering between money and state.
And that separation of church and state took something like 100 and 150 years, right? Like the people that started that project didn't finish that project. They didn't see Gutenberg, like, didn't he die in a cell, right? The guy that invented the printing press, like he was outlawed. Like, I mean, there's absolutely no question in my mind why Satoshi hid their identity from the world, right? Like on some level, they understood the beast that they're unleashing on the world. And I think things do accelerate, like things are happening at an accelerated rate. So I don't think it's going to take 150 years for the separation of money and state. It might take 20 years, right? We're 14 years into this 20-year experiment. I'm like more so on the belief that it'll take 50. Mm-hmm. Like I think by 2070, we will be completely detached, and the Federal Reserve will be a remnant. That's my hope.
Yeah, well,
we'll see.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting when you're talking to your grandkids and they're looking at you thinking, what the heck? You guys your monetary system, everything used to be pegged to the dollar, and a single government could just print more of it. Like, doesn't that just
Yeah.
clearly go against logic? But I mean, it's the logic that we're all operating under around the world.
That's one of the reasons why I want to procreate just in general. It's like I can teach my kids the next generation of financial knowledge, and then they can go and carry that out in the world and like be brought up with that with a different monetary psychology in place. You know what I mean? Like I was brought up having been installed with the dollar as my unit of account. And that influenced my psychology for the first 24, 26 years of my life, whatever it might have been. And like that influences my decisions. I don't think people really grasp how much the like whatever your unit of account and how you measure value influences your day-to-day actions and what you choose to value and what you choose to aim at and then go out and try and achieve. After I took a look back in hindsight, like, wow, it really did a number on me to have an inflationary currency be my unit of account.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, Kent's, I'm not sure if you've talked to Kent about this. I've had this conversation with him a handful of times where it's just very clear, right? An inflationary currency promotes short-term thinking and you're not thinking long-term versus a currency like Bitcoin that is deflationary or that has a fixed supply is going to make it so you want to have long-term thinking. You want to be willing to sacrifice today for tomorrow because you know that that currency is going to be, or that asset is going to be worth a lot more over time.
Meanwhile, like there's a heavy undercurrent in today's zeitgeist of there is no tomorrow, right? The world's ending in 50 years or the world's ending in 30 years. It's like, no, actually, I'm going to fight tooth and nail to make sure that we have a good world to live in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Actually, like I am going to take a long-term output and like to hell with your apocalyptic scenario.
Yeah. Well, so on that note, there's one other topic that I did want to cover with you. So when I talked about earlier with the thought experiment, it was this topic of CBDCs, and we'll see wherever that goes. But real quick, before we dive into that, everyone who's listening, Keegan, aside from Sazmining, also runs a podcast. So your podcast is called the Go Full Crypto podcast.
Yep, and don't let the name confuse you. We are a Bitcoin podcast mostly.
That got me when I first. I was like, "Are you sure that this is the podcast?" And then I saw, and yeah.
So when we started it, we actually didn't know of like the big divide in the nomenclature of like just behind the word crypto and how much hate there was in the Bitcoin community for that word. Like, because to me it just meant like screw the banks and I'm going to opt out and I'm going to live as fully and completely inside the world of cryptocurrency as I possibly can. And I'm going to not use any of the services that the traditional world of finance is providing with me. And like, to me, we're actually more or less all on the same side. And I've like kind of come full circle here and realized that, but like crypto can be captured regulatorily in a way that Bitcoin cannot. But I still kind of like the name, especially that NOSTR's come out now. And like, I more so expand Go Full Crypto to like Go Full Cryptography, where like cryptography is the weapon through which we fight censorship and authoritarianism and information transfer, secure information transfer over the internet. Like that's kind of what the word Go Full Crypto means to me now. Anyway, that was a big aside. Back to you, Will, to ask your question there.
No, I just wanted to give you the chance to let everyone know about it. And I actually do like that approach as well. You definitely have not only a deep understanding of Bitcoin, but you've got a really deep understanding of everything being built around Bitcoin, which I think is really valuable. And it's something that, in this conversation, I've already learned a lot. So that's awesome. The last topic that I wanted to run through with you is a thought experiment on CBDCs. So to start, maybe if you just want to like define what CBDCs are or how you see CBDCs, and then we can start diving into, some interesting thought experiments around it. Hopefully it doesn't get too dystopian too quickly.
I'll try to keep it less dystopian because I actually do think that there are two sides or two polarities to CBDCs. CBDCs is just central bank digital currencies. So that's a digital form of money that's created and issued by some central authority, typically a central bank. They exist today, and and more countries are going to roll them out, and they're going to be a hyper efficient way at creating control structures, economic and monetary control structures around a population. That's more or less how I define them.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you my journey down learning about CBDCs and how my views have changed over time. So when I first heard about them, and this was also before I'd gone like fully down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. So my views have significantly changed. But when I first heard about them, I've always looked at blockchain technology as a very interesting form of technology that could be leveraged in different ways. It was almost like in the early days when you look at the internet, you knew that this was a revolutionary piece of technology, but you didn't know how this was going to influence different parts of the economy, what companies would be built. Just because something has a .com doesn't mean it's valuable. And so with blockchain technology, I was looking at it in a very similar way. And so when I learned about CBDCs and thought about it, I was like, okay, well, this could be really useful. This could be a beneficial use case of blockchain technology. And some of the examples that were given were, okay, well, you can have additional levers to pull on to have a more efficient way and a more to manage your money. And you could look at this in a lot of different ways, but one was like the obvious one was, okay, well, you can utilize this to stop terrorism, or utilize this to incentivize good behavior, or utilize this to more effectively push out programs around how money's being used, and like ensuring that money's being used for the right things. Where it took a kind of dark turn was where I started thinking, okay, well, in all these scenarios, I'm thinking about it from a benevolent leader's perspective, or someone who really wants to do what's best for their population. And I mean, as an entrepreneur, someone who likes building companies, I think about the good sides of the technology. Oh, if we have this technology, like if we have the internet, now all of a sudden we can create a company like Amazon, or we can go and create things that can make the world a much better place, make it a lot better for you to live in. But on the flip side, what happens if you have a leader who has control over a CBDC, or a government that has control over it, and it's the most hated leader of all time? Like, I mean, Hitler is just like an obvious example. Like, what happens if you give Hitler control of a CBDC? How does he use that to control his population? And then very quickly you see, okay, well, maybe you wouldn't want a government having control of a CBDC if you're not a fan of the leader, not a fan of the policies, or you have a tyrant in the seat. So I'll pause there and hear your thoughts on all this. But that's the journey that I've gone down, where you had the interesting technology, you had the potential for all the good things to happen, and then as I was presented with the other side, I started getting scared. And right now, CBDCs, they haven't been fully rolled out, but I think that it's inevitable that these CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, are going to come to fruition. And I'm not sure what happens from there.
I do think that we get them, though. Like, I do think that they're going to become a reality. So we need to figure out how to deal with that reality ahead of time, because there's going to require a lot of good thought leadership and quite frankly, innovation to combat the restrictions. Like, it's going to push a lot of things into the black market, Bitcoin probably included in many jurisdictions. I just imagine, like, you can no longer make payments to Kraken, period. For example, like, you just can't do it. And Kraken can't make payments to you either. And if you have a Kraken account, then, like, here's some penalties on your CBDC account. I'm with you though, Will. Like, when I first learned about CBDCs, it's like, okay, there's some potential here to allow us to build a good CBDC, like something that has the best interests of our of citizens, of the average individual, or just all individuals in mind. Like, I do think it's actually possible to build a CBDC that way. I just have zero confidence that it will be built that way. Like, if a government is mandated or put in charge of building a CBDC, I just don't think that they're going to build it without a backdoor, without those controls and those levers. Like, I think the right proper way to build a money that everyone uses in a country is to actually build the least amount of controls and levers into it. And then I realized, well, that's just Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So, like, we don't need a CBDC with no controls if we already have Bitcoin, right? Mm-hmm. But I actually do think that fiat currency is going to stick around for quite a long time. No, sorry, not fiat currency, government issued currency. And I do think that we'll reach a state wherein the public demands that the currency is backed with Bitcoin, because that will be the thing that is that'll be people's unit of account. That'll be the thing that people think in. But you inherit your identity from the currency that you use, right? So, like, when I go to Mexico, I convert my Canadian dollars to pesos because my Canadian dollars are suddenly worth zero in this new geographic region. but like you get your identity partially from the currency that you use. And I don't think that will go away, not for quite some time, right? So I'm a little unsure as to whether or not Bitcoin, I know it dissolves a lot of borders, but does it dissolve like the actual border between the United States and Canada to the degree that we're all using Bitcoin? So is there any difference between a Canadian and an American? Yes, I think that there are some things. And like one of the things that will be different is that, well, in Canada, we use the Canadian dollar, and in America, we use the US dollar. You know what I mean? So I still think that there's a need for us to build a monetary system to enforce our geographic, our cultural, our national identities. But I just have zero confidence that they're going to build it right.
Yeah, no, so I agree. I'm actually not sure if you know this, but Patrick, before he worked at Sazmining, that's our CFO, for people who are listening, he was working at a company that was working on central bank digital currencies. And
yeah, I did know that.
And then he wanted to get deep into the Bitcoin, in with a Bitcoin company. Glad he did. Feel like I was doing a good thing taking him away from that, working with us here at Sazmining. But in regards to your thoughts on what ends up playing out, I'm in agreement. I've actually been holding this thesis, what it sounds like the same thesis, but this thesis for a while, where you're going to, I'm not on the side of Bitcoin, everything just at the end of the day, very quickly becoming the end all be all. I think that you have the traditional financial system, how things are work today, the status quo, but you're simultaneously seeing this new decentralized financial system arise in parallel. So I think that you're going to have both systems, the one that is driven by the fiat currencies for all those reasons that you mentioned. At the end of the day, you have borders, you have governments that are not going to completely disappear, but then you also have this decentralized financial system, one that people can participate in, opt in, that is requires more responsibility. It gives you the ability for more self-sovereignty. You could plug into one fully. You can plug into the traditional system fully. You could be a little bit in both, which I think that over time, more and more people are going to continue to opt into this decentralized system. You know, as more and more people opt in, that's when the price goes up. That's when the value of this starts to become more valuable. When you look at Bitcoin today, it's a much different value proposition than if you were looking at it in 2011. And that's because a lot more people are in it. A lot more people are behind it. There's a lot more, not just financial backing, but it's captured the hearts and minds of people. People are seeing it as money and having value. And I think that that's just going to continue to grow over time. But in terms of the traditional system, in terms of fiat currencies and countries giving that up, I just don't see a world where that's ever given up. I just see a world where eventually governments lose more trust with their people, and then a larger percentage of the population decide to opt out or not hold 100% of their wealth in the centralized traditional system.
Yeah, eventually I think countries, nation states, they will, their incentive profile will flip at a certain point in time, right? And that'll be a huge bifurcation point. To me, that's almost the suddenly point. You know, when we say gradually, then suddenly, we'll come to a point in time where like just this massive actor out of nowhere will be like, well, we're screwed economically. And our only option here is to go and back our new currency. We're going to flip. We're going to destroy the old currency. We're going to reissue a currency, but it's going to be backed with Bitcoin. That's the only way we can do it. And then the other countries will be like, oh, God, I have to do it now. I don't have any other choice. Like, I either have to go to war with that nation, or I have to buy Bitcoin and back my own currency with Bitcoin. Because I think that's to me the point of no return.
Yeah, once you get that print-a-thon, and then everyone, it's like, oh, the U.S. GDP, oh yeah, that's like 180,000 Bitcoin, and then all these countries are denominated in Bitcoin. That's when, like, maybe at that point, Peter Schiff will be like, okay, maybe I should take this thing seriously.
Right? Yeah. Someday.
Yeah, someday.
We'll get there eventually.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to close it out. We've been going for almost, I don't want my camera to die. What happened the other day with Brad, my camera died, and then we just had to close it suddenly. So I have a feeling that my camera is going to die soon. So I think that's a good place to call it.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was a fantastic conversation. We covered a lot of ground, talked about Sazmining and the product that we built. So I hope that there's some enthusiastic Sazians out there that will chop up this podcast and this video into good clips. If you're listening on the Fountain app, you can clip it and boost it and get rewarded in SaaS, which is just an unreal value proposition from a podcasting perspective.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for listening, folks.
And you're not going to want to miss the story of Brad going from rags to riches in this video, or the secrets of the entertainment industry from Kyle in this video. So make sure you click one of these, and I'll see you next time.
Inflation is transitory.